I remember the first time her music seeped into my world, like the smell of rain on hot asphalt, sudden yet inevitable. I was sitting on a wooden curb by the old fountain in City Park, tuned to my guitar, nearly losing faith that anyone would ever hear my music. Then came that sound, a violin. Light, airy, like a balloon rising into the sky, yet with a depth that hit me straight in the chest. I lifted my gaze. The empty bench across from me was deserted, and I realized the source of the sound was invisible. The melody danced with my chords, pulling something new from the guitar, something I hadn't even known I could feel. My heart beat faster. My finger froze on a string, and we fell silent, as if both of us were waiting for a signal. The next day, I arrived early, but she was already there. I noticed how her violin glimmered in the sunlight, and I imagined the light playing across every curve of wood and metal. We played together in silence, exchanging no words, and yet I felt her presence more strongly than any words could ever convey. She never looked at me. Perhaps it was shyness, perhaps the fear that we might break some magic that only we and our instruments had created. I tried to keep my eyes on her hands, where each note came alive like tiny flashes of light. Days turned into ritual. I would arrive at 5, she 5 minutes earlier. We'd sit in our corner of the park, and the music became our daily dialogue. I left little messages in the chords, quick, unexpected runs that seemed to coax a smile, and she would respond with soft trills, long trembling notes that made my heart quiver. Sometimes I dared small tricks, leaving a note on the bench with a sketch of a melody, and the next day finding her reply, a tiny note on a scrap of paper with a melody drawn in. We laughed quietly in our hearts, though no one could see it. One evening, an old woman with a dog approached us. She listened for a moment and said, "I've never heard anything more beautiful. You seem to be speaking without words." I wanted to say something clever, but the words got stuck in my throat. She gave me a brief look, and I felt it was a sign. I was no longer alone in my world of music. Yet, this brilliant harmony also carried tension. Every time her hands lifted the violin, I wanted to ask, "Who are you?" But the words would choke, and I would choose notes instead. Sometimes when she paused, I felt the air between us grow thick with unspoken longing. Once during a rainstorm, our melodies were interrupted by a sudden thunderclap. People scattered, and we stayed under an old tree, separated only by drops of rain. Water soaked through my shirt, and her hair stuck to her face. I watched her look at the guitar, at the strings, and felt that, like me, she was afraid to break our silent connection with words. "Next time," she whispered, though I wasn't sure if she meant me or herself. I nodded because any other word felt too crude. And so, day by day, we built our small world of notes and pauses. A world where you could confess without words, where every violin trill was a sentence, and every guitar chord an answer. A world I was afraid to shatter with a simple hello. But something inside me whispered, "We can't wait forever." That day, I arrived at the park later than usual. The sun was already sinking behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I saw her at the other end of the bench, violin tucked under her arm, hair tossed by the wind. But something was different. Her gaze, absent, distant, seemed to search for something far beyond the park. I sat down beside her, but didn't start playing. I just watched. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I could hear its own beats. Suddenly, she lifted her violin, and the sound sliced through the air. But the melody was unusually sad, almost tragic. I tried to respond, but my guitar chords felt heavy, awkward, foreign compared to her notes. "You're not playing like you usually do," she said quietly, without looking at me. I pretended not to hear. I didn't want to break the magical wall between us that we had built in silence. That evening turned into a silent duel of notes. I slipped quick, unexpected runs into the melody, and she responded with long, trembling sounds that felt like whispers. It was as if we were arguing, but without words. Then, suddenly, a man with a music bag approached, at least 20 years older than us. He stopped to listen. "Interesting what you're creating," he said, with some unexplainable spark in his eyes. "Maybe you should perform together on stage. This combination is rare." We exchanged a silent glance. I felt something flutter inside me. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Then she shrugged. "I don't know," she said softly. "Me neither," I replied, though my heart was shouting, "Yes!" A week later, it happened again. We met, we played, we were silent, but something in the air had changed. Every note, every chord now carried both anticipation and anxiety. I noticed the little details, how her fingers trembled when she lifted the violin, how quickly she looked away when I tried to meet her eyes. One day, I left a small note in her spot. "Don't be afraid. The melody will guide us." The next day, she brought a tiny ribbon. On it were notes, arranged into a whimsical but beautiful melody. My heart tightened. She was speaking to me through music, not words, and I began to understand. We were both afraid of destroying what we had created. But life has a way of interfering with perfect rhythms. During one of our sessions, a group of teenagers approached, running around, laughing and shouting. The violin trembled and the melody broke off. I felt irritation rising, but she just looked at me and smiled with a hint of irony. "They don't understand anything," she said softly. "Probably not," I replied, but something inside me snapped. I realized, even in the chaos of the world, we could remain connected. The next day, the unexpected happened. She wasn't there. I waited for hours, playing alone, feeling the emptiness in every chord. Then the same man who had suggested performing approached me. "She's in the hospital," he said, and his words fell heavily on my heart. "A fall on the stairs. Nothing serious, but—" I rushed there, not thinking about my wet clothes or the guitar growing heavier in my hands. When I entered the room, she was lying there, her leg and arm wrapped in bandages, but with a faint smile. "You came," she whispered. I sat beside her, holding her hand. "I waited for you," I began, but the words stopped. When the doctors left, we sat in silence, looking at each other, and then I felt it. This moment could no longer live only in notes. We returned to the park 3 weeks after her injury. She walked a little carefully, holding her violin, while I carried the guitar, feeling its weight in my hands and an even heavier weight in my chest. The air smelled of autumn and damp leaves, and the fountain murmured more quietly than usual. Everything looked familiar, but now the space felt new, after almost losing it. We sat on our bench in silence. I dared to speak first. "I was afraid you wouldn't come back." She looked at me, and I saw in her eyes a reflection of my own fear and relief at the same time. "I wanted to, but I couldn't. I couldn't be without you." The melody of our music began on its own, as if our instruments knew the moment had come. Her notes grew warmer, my chords softer, and the air between us was filled not just with sound, but with words we had been afraid to say. "Have you ever thought," she asked quietly, "that our melodies could be something more?" I paused, feeling my heart pounding so loudly it seemed like it might burst through my chest. "I think about it every day," I admitted. but I was afraid of ruining what we had. She smiled, and for the first time I'd noticed a playful glint of light in her eyes, dancing with warmth and hope. We played longer than ever before, leaving threads of melody in the air that were no longer hidden signals, but words. Every note shouted, "We're finally here." But life had one more unexpected turn. A man in a suit stopped by our bench, holding a flyer for street musicians. "Excuse me," he said. "We're looking for talent for a concert at the downtown theater. Your combination of guitar and violin, it's magical. I heard you here before. I was blown away by your performance." She and I exchanged a glance. Her fingers trembled slightly on the violin. "Maybe we're ready?" I asked. She nodded, and we smiled together, as if for the first time without fear. After that evening, we stayed on the bench, but didn't start playing. The silence felt deeper than any melody. I finally gathered my courage. "Katie," I said softly, "can I finally say what I've meant all this time?" She tilted her head, her eyes shining. "Of course. I want you to know that you've become a part of me, my music, my world. I'm afraid that if I say it wrong, we might lose something precious." Katie smiled and lifted the violin to her shoulder. "You've already said it. Through every note, every chord, every little sign, I've felt you all along. And you know what? I'm afraid too. But now I'm afraid not to say it." We laughed like children, finally daring to embark on an adventure. And then it happened, the thing we had feared for months. I reached out my hand, she took it gently, and I felt a warmth stronger than any melody. "So, we're together?" I asked. "Together," she said, and our instruments answered in a single chord that spread over the park like a promise. We played for another hour, but now every note was a celebration, not a test or a message. People stopped and listened, and we smiled at each other knowing we would never play alone again. And then, as the evening wrapped the park in quiet, Katie rested her chin on my shoulder with her violin in hand and said, "You know, I used to be afraid that music was all that connected us. Now I understand. Music was just the beginning." I held her and we stayed there, among autumn leaves and the old fountain, where our notes had turned into words and words had become a life that was just beginning.